Good morning. Thank you for that. And I'm from Missouri too, I think. So, woohoo. Well, you are too?
Yeah.
Nice, very nice. So just to check in really quick, how many of you were here about a year and a half ago when I gave this presentation? Okay, because this is I like to know who knows what they're getting into and who doesn't. This is gonna be a little bit different today because I remember last time there were some requests for activities and games that you could play more individually with clients, one-on-one, rather than in groups. So it's gonna be a little bit different with the activities that we're gonna do today. But I want to just tell you very quickly a little bit about me and how I came to be doing this. I'm not going to talk at you very much. A lot of the learning is going to come as we do the activities and then process them, because that's how I work with patients and therapists in general. But I accidentally joined an improv class about 10 years ago. I was going through a life transition and someone tricked me into thinking it would be a good idea. I didn't actually know what improvisation was. I really walked in the room thinking, I don't know what I thought we were going to be doing. But what I learned is that I was never going to be a great improviser, but that my life got a whole lot better. I was making different choices. I felt more confident. I was trying new things, taking new risks. And so what I noticed, and then when I started my MSW a couple of years later, I noticed that everything they were teaching me about becoming a therapist and a social worker were the same principles of improvisation. And that shouldn't have been surprising because improvisation actually came out of our profession. It came out of the settlement houses. In the social work profession, it was designed basically so that immigrant children could get to know each other and play and become integrated into their lives without having a common language. So for anybody who's nervous about today, what I like to say is if you have the capacity to play Duck, Duck, Goose or a children's game of that level, you're going to be fine doing what we're doing today. It doesn't require a whole lot of being funny or witty or even that smart. But I don't want to talk your heads off. I kind of just want to get you playing and seeing how these things get used. When it comes to working with people with addictions, which I do a lot in my practice, I notice that improv has some good overlays because not only do some of the principles that make you a good improviser also help recovery, but I find that people in recovery, especially just starting out, are basically learning how to live in a new world, right? They're living in a new reality. And so improvisation by nature allows you the opportunity to practice and try things out in a different weird reality and to build those skills and to say, what if I did do this? What if I did it this way? Because that very much parallels what I think people in recovery are trying to navigate. The other way that I think it's helpful is that people in recovery, I find, are often trying to figure out how to have fun without substances. And these games, even though they're probably not going to like go home and play the games all the time, they do give them access again to that feeling of fun and that sense of like, oh, this is in me. And if it's in me, it must be something that I can access outside while still sober and still not using substances. Because once you get that experience, I think sometimes it's hard to remember what that's like and that it is in you. So these activities can help kind of regenerate that sense and be like, oh, that is in me, and it didn't require a substance. And that memory and that knowledge can be powerful in itself. But I'd rather give you guys a chance to see this and test this out. So a lot of what we're going to be doing today is actually going to be one-on-one. But I do want to get you in the room and kind of wake you up in an improvisational kind of way. So I'm going to invite you in a minute to stand up. Just so that you know, improv is entirely consent-based, and I kind of often compare it to yoga in that you can make adjustments. So if I ever ask you to do anything that you physically have trouble doing, just adapt it for yourself and make it something that you can do. And if you don't want to do it and you just want to watch, that's also fine. I'm pregnant, so I make adaptations for myself. But we never in improv push ourselves to do anything that we're not comfortable with and that doesn't feel right, and we can just adapt things because much of this is about accepting who we are, where we are, working with what's real, what's in the room, and doing the same for the people around us. And generally that always works. We can always make pretty much anything work. But if you are feeling up to it, I would invite you to stand up really quickly. And the first thing I'm going to invite you to do is just for a moment, and you may not get to everyone, but something that improvisers do primarily before they perform, but I like to have any of my groups do it, especially if you're new to improv, is that improv is based on the principles of ultimate and undying support and trust. It doesn't work unless we have that. It doesn't work unless we commit to that and let each other know that no matter what happens, whatever you do out there, I've got your back. So improvisers will do this ritual, and I want to invite you to do it just to get the feel, which is I'd invite you to just walk around the room and pat people on the back, look them in the eye, and say, I got your back. If you don't want anyone to touch you, you can kind of just signal that to them and just do it verbally. But this is a surprisingly nice experience that I like to start with. So just kind of mill around, look people in the eye, say, I got your back, and that's kind of the frame that we will use to start. I got your back. 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 Back. I got your back. I got your back. I got your back. Hey, I got your back. And feel free to take as long with this as you'd like. If you feel like you're done, you can come back to your chair. But if you want more, take it. Why not? So, any reactions to that? Anything you notice? Like, how was that for a way to start your day? What was great about it? I heard great. The smiles. What's joining about it? I like that. Yeah. It kind of brings people in. Anybody like the words or the sentiment? Or notice that? What was that like?
Like, we started with pat your back, but a lot of us are like hugging, you
Uh-huh.
know? So,
Yeah, you guys took it like way further.
It was a lot about, you know, probably the nature of most people, you know, that are in this field.
Yeah.
You know,
Is that kind of ultimate support. And imagine if we were more explicit about that all the time. I think this is not generally a way that we start our day. It's often not a way that we walk into rooms or do. But if, you know, I just invite you to imagine how you might feel or go about meetings, interactions with patients, interactions with staff differently, if you knew that you both had this contract of whatever happens, I have you, no matter what. Because I think especially in addictions, there can be a lot of judgment, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, fear of judgment. And there's interesting things start to happen when we take that out and just say, whatever happens, I got you, and we'll figure it out. And there's no way that you can screw up, at least with me. Which doesn't mean that we tolerate bad behavior, right? I like to make that very clear. We don't tolerate abuse. But we do say, if you're willing to part with the bad behavior, I've got you. You fundamentally, I have. And that's a powerful piece, I think, for people. Because in improv, there are rules. It's not just a free-for-all. We do have rules and structures that we all agree to adhere to. But we can screw those up and we can kind of experiment. But in the end, it's like if you're willing to play by these rules and be respectful, I got you. So, next thing we're going to do before the partner work is I'm going to have you stand up again, and then you'll get to sit down, I promise. But go ahead and stand up again. This is just kind of a wake up, get in the room, make sure you're here activity. It's called Crazy Eights. We often do it again before we perform and often to start practices. If you can count to 8, you can play this game. So basically, I'm going to count to 8 on this hand, and then I'm going to count to 8 on this hand. I'm going to do 8 on this leg, 8 on this leg. Then we're going to do 7, 6, 5, 4 on down. You guys are going to do everything I'm doing. So you're going to repeat the numbers and you're going to do the motions. Because one of the fundamental rules of improv is if someone looks like an idiot, we join them. We don't laugh at them. We don't stand there and be like, what are you? I don't know what you're doing. That is like not. We join them in their idiocy. So I'm going to invite you guys to join me. I'm going to look like a goofball. But I'm going to trust you guys are going to join me and we'll just see how this goes. All right? Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yay! Why yay? Because you guys started out kind of like, I'm not sure I'm doing this with her. She said I didn't have to. I'm not. So why did the energy go up as you guys played? What happened? It was fun? Was it less fun when it was 8 and 7?
Yes.
Why?
I don't know, it just felt odd. It just like,
And it was slower.
Yeah.
I mean, you can move, the speed, you got going because, your number got smaller and it's like, okay, we're getting there,
So the speed of it moved your kind of enthusiasm up. Were we?
Like not knowing what we were gonna be doing as we started, like in the very beginning. It's like, okay, where is this gonna go?
Like, what is she doing? Why is she, like, what are we? But then once you figured out, I'm going to lead you into an impossible scenario, basically. For some reason, everybody's like, that's cool. Now we'll play. That's fine. But it's interesting. So you were more in your heads and possibly more self-conscious when it was slower. And then when you realized that it was faster and possibly that you couldn't do it right, there's absolutely no way to do it right at that speed, maybe people calm down. I want to invite you to do one more round of that, this time making deliberate eye contact with the people around you. And I want to see how that may be different. So, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to stare down one person the whole time. That's weird. But feel free to kind of, as you are doing this, maintain eye contact with folks. Be connected in it. And let's see how that's different. All right, you guys ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. All right, very nice. Have a seat. Did you notice anything different when you were making eye contact and being more connected? It was harder?
It's silly when we were all doing it as a group versus just across.
Say the beginning of that again.
I said it felt better when we did it as a group because it was like a connected silliness instead of one-on-one silliness.
Yes, like I'm doing this, is the person next to me doing this? You're kind of both looking at each other like, can you believe we're doing this? Like that, so that felt, it was less anxiety provoking for you in that way. What else did you notice? I thought I heard somebody say it was harder. It is harder. With the eye contact.
Yes. You're trying to think about what you're doing and engage in eye contact with somebody else, and you're not just staring at them blankly, so it's kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like chewing gum and whatever, that I can't even say it. And I always think about that, particularly with folks with addiction, because that's what they're trying to do, right, for the first time. is they're trying to be in the world and be connected to people, not be zoned out, not be kind of out of it. And that is a skill, and it is difficult. It's difficult emotionally, intimacy-wise, but it's also just difficult focus-wise, often, if it's not what we're used to. We have to kind of activate and work with different circuitry with that. But then you have the other piece of, it feels so much better. I feel so much less alone, and there's something that feels better about it. But you have that ambivalence, right, about kind of being in that relationship, looking silly, trying new things. And so I think there is that push-pull that can happen. Yes, ma'am.
I like this, and I think that this is very good because when people smile, the brain chemistry changes. However, I would be concerned because a lot of people in addiction have been traumatized. They don't want somebody to touch them, and they don't want to make eye contact. And I have women that will not go to AA because they don't want anybody to hug them. So I think we got to be aware of that too.
Thank you for that. And I should have, you may have noticed I did that with the first game. With this game, I forgot to make it explicit. But we always, with these games, make it explicit that if you don't want to do a part of this, if you don't want the touching, some people can't do yelling because there's something triggering about that for them. And that's why, especially when we're using improvisation for clinical purposes, we always give permission to opt out or to say, you can do a piece of this. For some people, just being in the room with it is enough. And so I do like for people to stay in the room, but it's kind of like, if you don't want the touching part, just signal you don't want to do the touching part. If you need to kind of stand further away from people, that's cool too. You don't want to yell, that's fine. And so we give a lot of permission with this, which I think we should do anyway with everybody, but because of the high rates of trauma, the high rates of just kind of general fragility, insecurity that comes with the especially the initial phases of sobriety. But if people can't, and even we work with that, so if we are doing this with a group and there is an activity and somebody says, I don't want to do that, I don't like that part, but they have the comfort level to talk about that. What is it about it? Is it the yelling? Is it the standing? Is it everybody, what's going on that you don't like? What's it raising in you? We can sometimes help learn about ourselves in ways that we can't with just talking. So, depending, but yeah, you're always using your clinical judgment. I'm, using it when you pick games, but always giving permission to opt out or to make it bigger. Like we had the people that were hugging. I didn't say hug, but improvisation is all about like we accept whatever. So it's like if you want to go bigger, and if you want to say not for me today, that's fine too. And we don't judge that. We're cool with it. So thank you for raising that. Yes, ma'am.
I came to yours last year when you did this, and I've actually incorporated this into one of my groups. Awesome. With really great results. I do this with a couple of other exercises, but this is how I will start the group and then ask people, what did you think? And there was a couple of other exercises that you did. Maybe you'll do them again today, but I would ask them, what was that like for you? And it was about being present in the moment, not worrying what other people think about what you look like.
Right.
Because you figure peer pressure got a lot of our people into this, and destigmatizing what other people think of you is to me a real important piece of this.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that because I love hearing that. And yes, these games many of them have so many layers that it's like you can use the peer pressure piece or just the body piece. But it helps people talk about and access things that we don't always get to with just verbal communication. So the next thing were there any other comments about yes, ma'am.
I really appreciated how the two activities followed one another because initially starting with the counting one, it was like, okay, we're going to do something silly. I'm going to look silly while my back was turned. But as we did like one-on-one, it was like, oh yeah, she has my back. Mm-hmm. So I kind of connected that and I felt less silly and I feel like I did it better because it was the second time. But also I didn't feel as much pressure of, and it was like, we're doing this together.
Yes.
I didn't think about the rest of the room. It's just kind of like, we're doing this together. We're both looking crazy. Get it done.
Which is how shame gets deactivated, right? Like shame lives here, and like, I don't know if and that is very like, well, nothing to be ashamed of. We both look ridiculous. Like it's, there's something about that very explicit communicating eye contact piece when you look silly that heals and makes it easier because we're all going to make mistakes, right? we're all going to screw up, but it makes it tolerable for us emotionally, which is what so many of our patients need to build that skill. Yes, ma'am.
I found myself looking for eye contact. As okay, their eyes are over there and their eyes are over there. How are we going to get this contact? But it was okay. And then when I couldn't do it anymore, I just made up a silly dance.
Well, and it may, I mean, I was having that experience too. I bet you weren't alone. This also brings up the fear of rejection, right? That's another level you can look at. Is what if I'm trying to connect? Because I was having that too. Usually people don't want to look at the leader. I'm scary for some reason. But usually in this game, there are people that it's like you're looking around and everybody's got somebody else to look at or they're looking down. And so how do people internalize that? How do they process that? Is that personal? Is that because there's something wrong with me? Or is it just because everybody's distracted? Do I need to like find, a different pocket of people? But there's a big emotional process that will often go on, especially in small groups, around that because it is vulnerable to seek eye contact with somebody. And it is vulnerable to not be met in that. And so that's another piece to be aware of. Because it may be okay with you, but it might not be. And so, nobody, exactly, yeah. And so, but we internalize that and we feel that, and so do our patients. And so that's another way, because that's a lot of what they're grappling with, right? Is like, does anybody want to make eye contact with me? I've made all these mistakes. And so there's that piece too to look at. Was there yes, ma'am?
How soon do you incorporate this either into a group or individually? Because the touch of the back thing, I was thinking while I was doing it, if I had a brand new client, I probably I would want to establish trust first before doing something like that.
Right. And that is something, the I Got Your Back is something I don't think I've ever done one-on-one necessarily. It's more of a group feature. But yeah, with all of this is not stuff I pull out on day one, usually, unless I'm doing an improv-informed group and people know that's what, you guys knew what you were walking into to some degree. But yeah, absolutely, and the two activities we're going to look at today, these are probably not like day one activities. And it's something that I consent people to. I want to try something a little different. Are you willing to play along with me? Does this feel okay? And if they say no, that sounds stupid and ridiculous, it's like, all right, that's fine. So yeah, we're always using our clinical judgment to are they ready? Is the relationship ready? Some of these games can be used as like assessment tools. Some of them you use more therapeutically. But again, it depends on your style and it depends on your instincts about what's going to work for this person. Because I'm never trying to make somebody feel silly or in over their head with this. Yes, ma'am.
Same thing. I mean, the issue trust, because it's the basis. It's a big issue with addiction. Yeah. And to have somebody touch a stranger with eye contact could be very traumatizing. I would, but you said you don't do it right away.
Right.
But I'm thinking of doing it. You'd be amazed how many I teach college, and they are like really, messed up too with anxiety. And I know they want to connect, but everybody is so afraid.
Yeah.
I would be kind of frightened to do the touch thing that I could get in trouble. And so we could just leave, you know what I'm saying?
And so that's a big piece that actually with performing improv troupes and with my groups, that we may talk about those, like, how do I know if I can touch you? How do I know? And so you may be discussing that for 3 weeks before you play a game, and talking about it and making it very explicit, because it's like in improv on stage, we don't generally you can't stop the scene and be like, I would like to be not touched here, But this comes up everywhere. Like, I didn't know if I should, and so how do we signal that? Which is part of social skills teaching too, and boundaries. Like, do you pick up when somebody's trying to tell you? And so there's those pieces. But yeah, with some groups, you may just talk about this for a long time. And everybody's saying, I don't want to play that game because it's too risky. So yeah, you're building all of that in. It's all just, I think of these games as data, right? And we just use them as data. And some of the data comes from why I don't want to play the game. And that's fine too.
I want to say, I look at it as also allows the individual to focus on themselves. Because a lot of times, and also that they've been defeated, and even trauma, disappointed, individuals are told what they could not do. And here, so myself, if I could, just the simplest thing, if it was for a fun exercise, hey, I did something right today.
Yeah, and okay to say, I didn't want to do the eye contact part. I've been spending my whole life taking care of people and connecting with people, and I need to figure out how to just be me. But what a powerful thing to say and know and own and have that be like, that's cool. You don't have to play. Like, you know, these rules are kind of suggested guidelines, but a lot of our folks that are in treatment need to learn, like, I got to decide my own boundaries and my own rules, and these games allow that. So the next thing I want to make sure that we get to do, so you guys have, I think, which handout do you have the 7-line story handout? Does any, so let's do that first, because I think he's got the copies of the other one not currently in this room. So we'll do that first by process of elimination. So I think before, let's see, how do I want to do this with such a big group? I think we're just going to do the activity, and then we'll talk about what on earth this has to do with. So you guys all have the 7-line story structure in front of you. This story structure is universal. It is culturally, it's how basically, if I were to have one of you stand up and tell a story right now, you would most likely unconsciously put it into this structure. You may not use every single line, but you'd use most of them. And if you think about the stories you tell, you can map them onto this structure pretty well. But let's just play with this first and kind of see how it is. So I'm going to have you guys all write on your page an opening sentence. So for the, it is once upon a time, right? You're going to write the beginning of a story. It can be any story. There was a magic mouse that flew. There was a girl who, like, I don't care. Any story, but you're only going to write the first line on your paper, and then you're going to stop. You're just going to, but this can be a fairy tale-ish. It can be realistic. You know, it can be whatever. You're literally writing just a once upon a time line. There was someone who did something, where something happened. And does anybody need a pen? I have extra pens if anybody, you guys are so prepared. Oh, good, okay. One sentence. And when you are done with your one sentence, you are going to hand your paper to the person to your right. And they are going to write the next sentence. And then they are going to pass the paper again. So you are only ever writing one sentence on each paper. Spelling is totally optional. And try to avoid, if you are not sure what somebody meant, like if you're getting one and you're like, what did that, try to avoid asking. Because when we are improvising, we don't get to ask, what did you mean, or was it this way? And sometimes some of the really fun moments we get actually come out of the misunderstandings. You guys are all thoroughly enjoying giving up control, I can tell. Yes, no, you're passing it, it's going to go around the room. You will never see that paper more than one, you're writing one line, someone else. So it may need to go in between tables. Yeah, you're building off of, right, the story on the paper should make sense. And remember, nobody's going to know it was you, so you can have as much fun as you want with your sentences. Until the story is finished. But nobody should get the same paper twice. So if you need to pass it to another table. If you did do the same paper twice, that's not the end of the world, that's fine. But yeah, make friends with your other tables. And if I hear some folks have finished up, if you are finished, I want to make sure everybody ends up with a piece of paper that they have never seen or touched. So if there's one sentence on your paper that you wrote, just pass it off to somebody else. If not, keep it. So then, yeah, ideally, everybody ends up with one complete story that they've never seen. Okay, so I would like to ask, so we're going to talk about this in the process of doing it, but first I'd like to just let you see what these are. So can I have a volunteer who would read the story they have in front of them with us knowing that you had nothing to do with creating it? Yes, ma'am.
Once
Can you guys hear her?
Yeah.
So I'll repeat, do one line and I'll repeat it. And then.
Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there were 3 children.
Once upon a time in a faraway land, there were 3 children.
And every day they grew and grew and grew.
And every day they grew and grew.
Until one day there was no food.
Until one day there was no food.
And because of that, they learned to plant seeds and grow plants to eat.
And because of that, they learned to plant seeds and grow plants to eat.
And because of that, they had food every day.
And because of that, they had food every day.
Until finally, they had so much they could share with others in the community.
Until finally they had so much they could share with others in the community.
And ever since then, they have been happily working and running a co-op in their community.
And ever since then, they have been happily working and running a co-op in their community. That is such a sweet story. So nice. Awesome. Who else has one they could read us? Yes, ma'am.
This is, once upon a time, there was a tree that could talk.
Once upon a time, there was a tree that could
I
talk.
can talk loud.
Oh, can you? Okay, sure.
And every day the tree would talk to everyone that it came across, until one day it became completely covered by moss. And because of that, the tree became a home to creatures who needed cover and protection. And because of that, other trees wanted to learn to talk and cover others in their need, until finally the giving tree gave out. And ever since then, others had the wisdom and knowledge of the talking tree and how to take care of others.
Oh, these were obviously written by clinicians, right? These are so nice. They're not always this nice, but that's another lovely one. Anybody who else has? Let's do a couple more. Yes, ma'am.
Once upon a time, I got lost in the city, and every day I searched for the reason why I got lost, as I had a detailed map. Until one day, I asked someone for help, and because of that, I was sent to a store that had incredible maps, and because of that, I was able to get back on track. Until finally, I found my way home, and ever since then, I have enjoyed traveling and became a world traveler.
Awesome. Very nice. One more. Yes, ma'am.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl who dreamed of marrying a rock star. And every day she would listen to rock songs on the radio. Until one day she went to a concert. And because of that, they became friends. And because of that, she decided to join the band. Until finally, she realized this was not the life she expected. And ever since then, she has worked as a therapist, helping others with
Very nice. Does anybody else have one they really want to read? Or yes, ma'am.
So this one's just fun.
Good. Yes.
Once upon a time, there was a time I gazed at stars, and every day I would wish for an extra leg, until one day I saw a shooting star, and because of that, I believed that I could do, have, or be anything that I wanted. And because of that, I decided to mount a campaign to be president, until finally, I felt an extra leg might be helpful. And ever since then, my focus has been on my dual desire to become president and go up in space.
Very nice. So that one is a little more kind of, what would it give? Farcical is not the word I want, but like just fun and playful. Yes, ma'am.
I like that you could use this as an assessment, but what if you found like some really dark stuff and then he killed the cat and then he murdered the mother? Would you try to research who was doing that? Was it just in fun, or well, couldn't that be bringing up some issues?
It could be. Generally, this game I wouldn't use in that way because you have no idea. There's so many factors at play about with it. It's like, you know, you got 3 lines to get to that, and then it's like, what association did they make? And so I wouldn't necessarily, unless someone said, because generally, to talk about the process of this, generally improv groups have an ideal number of about 8 to 12. Right, so you'd have a much smaller, but here we're working with what we've got, and it is more fun to like just kind of pass it to, you know, as random as you can get, the better. But in a group of 8 to 12, you may hear things like, oh, I wrote that one, or I put the cat in there. And in that case, I might, depending on what the group is for and what's going on, I might say, do you want to say anything more about that? Or, what made you? But unless somebody owned it, because the premise of this is that it's anonymous, right? So that's part of, this is a helpful activity for groups kind of as an entry activity because there's no performance element. You do have to kind of wonder about if people have difficulty with any learning disabilities, spelling, literacy. So that piece is there. But otherwise, this is a very low risk activity because anything anybody writes, nobody knows who wrote it. The person next to you does. But generally, the idea is that it's all kind of the value of the story comes from the collaboration. So it lets everybody off the hook. So generally, I'm not like psychoanalyzing each line because there's too much that goes into it. I'm more with these looking at the process of that. But I mean, if you had a spidey sense or, a sense, it may be something I'd bring up individually later with somebody or, depending on how, and if they seem to want to talk, I killed off the mother or whatever, and they seem to want to talk about that, sure. But I wouldn't necessarily assume there was something there, because as you guys saw, I mean, did you guys write like random stuff that you were like, what is it? Yeah, I mean, because you're building on something, if that makes sense. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just thinking back that it could be a tool if you see a pattern. And again, I was
Yeah.
with Freud, but I remember the guy at Virginia Tech. He had written some very dark essays, and the English professor did pick up on that, and nobody paid any attention. It was almost like a cry for help.
Yeah, sure. So in that case, yes. If you're seeing a pattern where there's these like fun stories and then somebody is killing off the whoever in every story, yeah, I might. Generally, that's not what will happen with these. Like that would be a unique. But yeah, sure. If you feel like something is weird about this, but generally we're using them more as a process. And so what I mean by that is kind of going back to when you were writing these, I noticed a lot of groans when I asked you to give up the story. What was that about?
My story.
It's my story. I wanted to tell this character. I was going to decide what was going to happen with this person, and that was going to be the fun for me. And then I'm like, no, everybody else is deciding. And I saw even some people, it's like, no, give it back. So what does that help us look at in ourselves or in our patients?
Desire for control.
Desire for control. And why do we assume that we're going to have more fun on our own? Because would anyone, like any of the ones that were read, would you have written any of these by yourself? Like it's, right? We think very linearly. The fun often comes from the group process and the collaboration. But people don't trust that. We are instinctively taught in this society we are individuals and I am the value of whatever I put down. And so this challenges that and lets us experience like, why didn't I want to give it up? Or what was that about? Or do I like control in my life? Do I not? Was I kind of like, oh good, I did not want to be responsible for that whole story. Thank goodness. Some people may have had that reaction. And so that's again just data for us to look at. Like, what was scary about handing it off? What was fun? Were you surprised by the end results? Those sorts of pieces, kind of that process level about the reactions to it. Did I see a hand? Yes, ma'am.
I think that this says something to a clinician too, that a lot of times we hear the first or second line of our new client and don't want to, but our brain will go to another client or to our own experience, and staying with their story is important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. I've never thought about this in that way. But yeah, we need to hear the whole story, right? Where in this, I had a group of therapists I was teaching who actually noticed this. I hadn't thought of this connection. But where do you see the patient story starting in this structure? What line is like the most relevant to our patients? Probably. Yes, ma'am. Until one day. Which often will point to the start of the trauma or the start of the addiction or the start of the whatever's led them to you. And it also may point to the way out, because one day they got help or they did something differently. So in improv, we teach that we always start scenes with the until one day, because everything else is kind of boring. It's just context and setup. But that is the piece for our patients. And you could, I've never done this, but you could deliberately use this as a tell me your, story of recovery or addiction in this format in one line, and look at the until 1 days. I've never done this that deliberately, but it does sort of map the journey. But the important part is sort of that emotional hinge of this is the day everything changed. And that's in every story that we tell, otherwise it's boring. It's why we're telling the story. So that's the important piece.
I have notes on whoever has mine.
Are you Lisa? Are you Lisa?
No, Farm Girl.
Okay, well, somebody else has notes on that too. Farm Girl.
All right, so we'll have maybe strays that we can put up here and people can retrieve their notes. Any other things that you noticed about yourself in the process of that? I had a couple things I heard and noticed, but I want to see if there were any reactions going on with you in the process of doing that. I heard a lot of anxiety about, am I spelling this right? How do you spell this? I don't know, like my penmanship may not be right, or how. So how might I look at that if I were doing this in a group, or if somebody was, really focused on that piece? What was that?
How would they be judged?
Yeah, how have they been judged for not doing things perfectly? What would it be like to not care? Nobody's grading this. No, this does not matter. All you're trying to do is convey meaning. This is like a ridiculous story. Most likely it ends up in the trash. Nobody's publishing it. So what is driving that sense of perfectionism and those high stakes? Because they're not implanted in the exercise. It's obviously ridiculous, but we will still use them. So what would it be like to be exposed, if they did spell X wrong, or have they been exposed for that before, and what was that like? And what's it like to be in a place where it does not matter? Because one of the instructions I gave was, if you're not sure what somebody means in the sentence before, figure it out, like let it go, don't ask them, you can't even go back and ask, which then liberates the person from having to worry about that. But they'll often either put it on themselves anyway, or they get to talk about the experience of what it was like to not have to care for once that they were being perfect and getting it right. So that was a piece I noticed. Yes, ma'am.
I like the fact that you asked who want to share, and the fact that you had us pass it around, because sometimes in a group, people don't feel like they can say anything, or they feel afraid to talk. So by this way of passing it around, it kind of gave them still to put their own emotions into it without still staying anonymous and not kind of having that focus all on them.
Absolutely. It's a very deactivating, because it's performing, but it's secret performing. And the other piece is some people who may want to kind of start to insert themselves in a group, but may not be ready to talk yet, they might be willing to read their story that they got, because it has nothing to do with them. So it's like, oh yeah, I'll read that. It's nothing to do with me. That might be a good entry point. Or for people who have social anxiety or, performance anxiety, kind of like, can you read this story that has nothing to do with you? And often that can be their first kind of like, okay, I can put my voice out there, which is a powerful thing and often will then lead to more, even though it was generated in an artificial kind of weird way. Yes, ma'am.
I noticed that I did have a sense of being able to get control back, because when I got a story sort of halfway through, I'd say, oh no, I don't like the way this is going.
Yeah. So that's the nice piece about this, right? Is it's like I got to give up some control, but I also get to have some agency with, like, I can rewrite this story, or I can add in this fun little element, or I can kind of mess with this, right? So it is both. And so we gain and we give up. We gain when we give up, and vice versa. And this, for many of our patients, I think, is working that muscle in a different way. Because a lot of times they've either been so overly dependent or so overly independent, and that's why they're in trouble. And so it allows them to play with that other side. And again, we're just looking at it, right? We're not judging anybody's experience. We're going to notice in the group or with the person, like, isn't that interesting? You love that and you hated it. What's going on with that? We all have different reactions. It's just a way of learning about ourselves. There's no right or wrong way to be. And I always make that very explicit. I will often say in my debrief, what did you love about that? What did you hate? Because I don't assume everybody liked every game. I don't like every game. And I like for people to think about, what about my brain liked that game? Or what didn't? Or, those sorts of pieces. But I give a lot of permission very clearly to hate it, not like it, whatever. It wasn't fun, that sort of thing. That's fine. Cool. Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
About the sense of like perfectionist, I thought about that too on a different level. Or for me, my handwriting is not very neat. However, like if I'm doing a group type of thing or something someone else will read, I'm a little more like cautious of how I'm writing. But even one of the stories I started reading like a little later on, or it's the one that I ended up with last. And then after realizing like it was over, people were gonna start reading their story. I was like, oh, I read that wrong. Let me. So I'm still continuing to make corrections even after the activity is done. It just needed to be right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, like, I don't know who this is, where it started, where it's going to end
Yeah,
up.
fix it.
I had to fix it.
Yeah. So that's just a good thing to notice. And what would it have been like to not fix it? The last thing I always like to notice about this exercise is I heard usually there's a point where people start laughing. Where in the story did you notice you started laughing? Like when you received what somebody had written or when it was time to write it? Like what part does that usually happen at or what line? And because of that. Anybody else have a different one? But that's usually, it's later in the story. And I like to let patients know that if they're struggling with the being stuck on the until one day or that, that the fun in the story comes later if we can trust and go along with the process. We do get to the fun stuff, but it's not always like right in the beginning. The beginning is kind of the boring setup. And sometimes we're hanging out there, but we do get to more discovery and more of the unknown and more of the adventure later. Break time? All right. So let's take 10 minutes for you guys to have a break, and then we'll do something else different but similar. Cool. All right, welcome back. I think the amount of time we have left should be perfect for this next exercise. What I do want to see is if I can get everyone in pairs. So it's totally fine if you're at a table with somebody, but just try to get the tables even, and if not, we'll do one group of 3. But like if somebody would join this table, if we got an extra, just so everybody's got one buddy. This is a paired activity. And then I'm going to come around really quickly. I'm going to give out one, or actually I'm going to pass these around to be more efficient. But it's one sheet of paper for each pair. So each pair only needs one copy. And if you really want the instructions when we leave, those can be emailed to you, the thing on the back. As those come around, I'm going to ask, so up here, there are some orphan stories if anybody wants to check and wants to see if they want that back. There's also a set of markers and crayons on each of these tables. And so I'd like for everybody to just quickly come up and grab one crayon or marker per person. One marker, one crayon per person.
One marker or crayon or both?
No, just one.
Okay.
One. You just need one color, basically, per person. All right. So if everybody is settled and everybody has a buddy, so I've never actually done this, giving out the written instructions. This is like a new frontier. But I'm also going to give you the instructions verbally, but then I realize some people do better with written instructions. So the idea of this is that once we start, there is going to be no communication between you and your partner. That is verbal, nonverbal, no like kicking each other's feet, no winking, no like gesturing. Without any communication with your partner, one of you is going to make a line on your paper. And then when you're done making that line, your partner is going to make the next line on the paper. And then when that line is done, person A, you're just going to pass it back and forth, each taking turns making marks, lines on the paper. At some point, one of you will feel that the drawing is done. Again, you are not communicating to check about this. You're going to feel it's done. To signal that it's done, you're going to write a letter. The letter is going to be the beginning of the title of the drawing that you are making. Your partner will then write the next letter. You will write the next letter until one of you stops, at which point your drawing is finished. It is finished and titled and done. At that point, please turn it over. You are welcome to chit-chat with your partner if you're an early group finished, but please do not talk about that drawing, about your process of the drawing, about crayons, about anything related to that drawing. Just chit-chat about anything else. Does that make sense? I am saying line. That is up to, you will make a mark of your choosing. And when you are done, you will lift your writing implement, and your partner will make the next line of their choosing. Or mark of their choosing, if you like. Does that make sense? Any questions? Yes, ma'am. So when one of you feels like it's done, you're going to write a letter, which signals that we are now putting the title on the drawing. The next partner will put the next letter. Then you put the next letter, next letter, next letter. Someone will stop putting letters, and that signals that you are done totally. And you have titled your piece of art. Cool? Give it a try. And flip it over. Yeah, so use the whole blank paper on the back. Yeah, don't limit yourself. Use the whole back of the paper. If you haven't yet started the title, move towards that in the next 30 seconds. Is anybody still working? All right. So let's come back. This activity I do in 2 parts. So we'll see if anyone with such a large group, part 2, might feel a little too risky, but we'll see if we can get it done. But for the first part, just how was that for folks? So without talking about how was it just sharing this experience? Again, what did you love? What did you hate? Not everybody likes this. Some people love it. But how did this go for you internally?
As we continue tomorrow, and I'm Shawnee's tomorrow, we work together. As we were doing this for me, it was like later on in the process, we could actually read each other's mind.
So it started to feel like you got in sync as you were going, and you could anticipate, which is that I haven't often heard that with this, but it is what improvisers will start. If you're really turned in and listening, you can kind of start to anticipate and I know where we're going now, right? We have enough pieces that the flow of it becomes easier. Very cool. What else? Yes, ma'am.
The more you're doing this stuff, I think it can be very therapeutic.
This was supposed to be an elephant, but it's a horse elephant hybrid apparently.
And you're kind of doing it in a non-threatening way, and everybody needs that, or they're going to shrivel up and go back to
Right. The stakes could not be lower with this, right? I mean, literally, they could not be lower. But it can be a very activating thing because people will get, and you may have noticed this, surprisingly invested in and so you are in a partnership, and yes, we do have to be able to collaborate and be in partnership, but a lot of people it's you're going to screw up my drawing. You don't know what you're doing. I know where this is going, and you don't. I'm not. What is happening? And this one is kind of, the 7-line story, this one it kind of boils it down, makes it more intense because it is a duo. You can't get out of it. There's nobody else. And so, yeah, it really does trigger a lot of that stuff about, what else did anybody notice coming up for them as we're doing this? Yes?
We're kind of totally opposite, and it never connected. It never connected at all, even though we're coworkers.
Or because you're coworkers.
Fall back on that old standard that you can only control yourself. So instead of trying to kind of pull him into what I wanted it to be, I had to step back and say, okay, so he went this way with it, so how can I change my thought pattern to try to go along with what he's doing? So I kind of had to back off and look at me.
So it brings in that tension, right, of how much do I accommodate, how much do I want to accommodate, how much control do I want to have, how much do I want to give up. It also, and in that, I don't know if anybody had kind of their, this doesn't sound like what you're describing, but it can really highlight people pleasing, like kind of a sense of like, well, I just started trying to figure out what they were drawing, and I tried to draw it with them. And I just let go of anything I was doing, and I was just trying to figure out what they were doing. And kind of that people pleasing. And so how does that go? And how does that feel? Because there is so it's interesting how in what you were saying, it's like you were kind of like someone has to be in charge, right? Or kind of someone's got to win, somebody's got to lose. And so that's a fine assumption. But the other question we can ask is why? Why can't you just react to what the other person is doing in the moment and put your mark wherever you want? And even if it ends up nonsense, again, stakes could not be lower. But we have this thing about like, we got to make this a thing that makes sense. And I never said it had to make sense. I just said put marks on a paper. But for some reason, we put all these expectations and standards on ourselves of like, this has to be a presentable thing, and you are messing up my presentable thing. So I'm just going to go with your thing and hope that maybe, like, and it's kind of like, why? Why can't we just play and have fun? And if you put a mark there, I'm going to put it there, and let's see what we get. We tend to think in terms of those power dynamics and kind of who's in charge, who's not, who's in control, that piece. And that's just interesting. And do we have to do that? Yes, ma'am.
So ours was a dance.
Cool. What kind of dance?
But our first 2 steps were off. I mean, right, we've never met before. But it was interesting because we talked about when we first came in, we immediately connected. Like we actually looked at each other and just really started talking about who you are and what do you do. And so then we both had fun. We were like giggling and so while some people might interpret it as being, because she typically made the first mark and then I would either mirror it, but it felt like a dance and I wanted to write balance and she wrote love. Well, she started with an L, and I was like, L, what is she trying to say? I was like, no, it's balance. And I was like, oh, but we're balanced because we're in love, we're in connection, and so immediately we got it. So ours was like this ultimate dance.
That is deep.
It was
Yeah. And I like the part about we were giggling, because it sounds like you were not that invested in the outcome. It was kind of like, I don't know, like, what are you doing? You'll hear that. I heard a lot of giggling. I am curious how you knew that the first 2 steps were off.
Well, I drew a bird. Well, my perception of a bird is she drew a line, and I was like, well, that's supposed to be in the sky. A line. And then we just started connecting and mirroring. But I think the key of it was being open. Mm-hmm. So I was very open. As soon as I saw that she didn't know mine was a bird, I was like, I'm going to let it go. We're just me. And then stepped into this dance with her, and then she made the first step, and I would mirror or follow, and then add to and go back and build upon.
Did you know it was a bird?
No, I knew she didn't know.
What? Hold on, I have to see it.
No one's going to know it's a bird except for me.
Oh, yeah. But it's interesting, it's like, well, we were out of sync, because in my head I was making a bird, and then she did this thing, and now it's not the sky, which is how we all tend to think. And that part of that has to do with something called set shifting, which is a fancy word I learned from a friend of mine who's an ADHD specialist, which is we have a very hard time, and some of us have a harder time than others. People with ADHD have a harder time letting go of our original idea. So we get an idea, right? So it's a bird, and then the next person puts something that makes it not a bird, but we're still like, but it's a bird. And so now you messed up because it's a bird. As opposed to like, oh, interesting, not a bird anymore? Okay, what could that be? Because now I got a V and a line. What is that, right? So that's the practice that we're doing is kind of just automatically, oh, not a bird anymore, it's this, and seeing it as something new. And that set shifting process is very challenging for some people. For some people, it's relatively quick and easy. But it's a helpful skill, right? Especially if you're trying to recover from an addiction and you're used to these habits. It's like, how quickly can we shift ourselves and be like, oh, this is a new reality. Okay, I accept that. Moving on. I can still have fun with it. I can still play with it. Some people will get really invested in the, okay, that was a bird and you messed up a bird. and this is a bird, and they're going to spend the whole time trying to make this picture reflect a bird as opposed to the new reality, right? And so we can talk about that, and what is that about, and why is that hard? Because we often in life, we got to shift with a new reality. But that has different levels of challenge, especially interpersonally for people. Because we can say it like, well, you're just saying I'm wrong, that I didn't drive. Well, I'm not saying you're wrong. I saw it differently. Like, I didn't, I'm not trying to diss you. I'm not trying to disrespect you. I look like a bird to you. It looked like a V to me. That's not mean. It's not disrespectful. That's just how we see things. Yes, ma'am.
So the purpose of this is self-awareness for the individual, so they see patterns.
That's part of it.
Observing as a therapist are going to observe and point out things and think, see if they're correct. So you need to do this. You do this in like a group setting?
So I would do this in a group, as like we are doing it. It'd probably be a smaller group. This is fascinating with couples. This is real interesting with couples. And then I have done it even one-on-one, so with me doing it with a patient. I will then do less, I obviously won't reflect very much on me, but kind of on them, what was their process. Because there's a lot in this around leading and following, authority. I don't know if any of you, did anybody blow their drawing up? Some people are going along and they're like, this is too nice. I'm just going to draw a crazy line and mess it up. There's okay, yeah, it's kind of like, that looks like it's starting to make sense. I'm not going to do that. And so it's kind of like, what's that about? That's interesting. Again, we're not judging it. It's not bad because we make every drawing work. Again, stakes couldn't be lower. But what was that about that you couldn't stand for this order to be evolving? So we're also looking at it that way. There's a lot too interpersonally that will come up. Do I feel like I need to please this person? Do I feel like I need to railroad this person? How am I doing with letting go of control? Can I get playful and just let go of the outcome and just be in the moment and have fun? Or am I constantly harboring this we got to make this right? And then the next question I will often ask, depending on the setting, is how does that reflect how you are outside of here? How are you to work with? How are you in a team? How are you in a couple? Do you have trouble letting go? What's that about? Why? So just kind of, again, we're just using the data in a completely low stakes scenario because who cares? I mean, these are who cares? I mean, they're lovely drawings. They are beautiful. But they're probably not going in the Met, no offense, and that's fine. But it's amazing what standards we will put on things. And how does that affect us having fun? And then sometimes if you're in a group that's been going on a while, you can start to have dialogues about what was it like to do this with the other person. And so then you might start to get more of that interpersonal feedback, I really felt like you were trying to control this whole process, and that made it not very fun for me. Or, I really felt like you drew this whole big thing, and then there wasn't any room for me. Or I felt like you were just trying to please me, and then that was making, so you can start to do, if they're ready, some of that interpersonal stuff about the other, and what was it like to be with you, and would you have liked me to be more assertive or more laid back? And usually all of that stuff will mirror something going on outside. So any other thoughts on the process of drawing? Yes, ma'am.
A couple of things. One is that I had this yellow marker that was very, very light. Virginia had this purple crayon. They did not connect. They just didn't match up very well. So we both were responding to that, but then we just kept going, and it was more curiosity. I don't know about curiosity. And at some point, we both saw that we had the makings of a baby.
You saw it together, it felt like?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's that fun kind of flow moment of oh, that's what it is, right? You let yourself live in the discovery, and if we can trust the unknown discovery, we can often get to the point together where we're oh, that's what that is, and we can agree. But we sometimes have to let ourselves be in the messy before we can get there. And if we can't tolerate the messy, that's when we feel controlled or controlling, and then we just have a boring picture sometimes that we don't love that much, or didn't have as much fun making. Any other thoughts about that process? Yes, ma'am.
So for me, I was, before before it started, when we're reading the instructions, I already know in my mind, I'm like, I need her to start first because I kind of know that I would have my own idea of where it would go. And so when we started, I was like, she has a plan, you know. So I kind of did. It started with one long line. I kind of did like a tiny line, like, okay, I'm following you. I got to pick up, you know, what you're putting down. And I started somewhat mirroring. And then when the next one wasn't what I thought it was gonna be, I just kind of gave up. Like, never mind, we're just gonna draw lines until, you know. And even for me, I was the one that kind of started doing. Okay, well, we don't have any squiggles, so I'll put some squigglies over here, or you know. And mainly as the pattern started to change up, as things got different, I said, okay, well, let me see what I can put towards it that would be different, you know. And I thought about, well, just kind of trying to analyze for myself, like what it started out to be. My initial plan was to be, I guess, like submissive, or to kind of like follow along and not to be the one to control it. But then by the time we were I started with the letters, you know, and by the time at that point it was back to, no, that's not the title. You know, like, no, that's not what I wanted it to, you know, be. But we just ended up kind of having fun
After you let go of because the pieces I might be talking about with you would be that sort of, I didn't want to lead, but I had very strong ideas about how this should go. And so what goes on with that, and why not just go ahead and if you have ideas, lead with them. And then you getting frustrated when you were like, she's got a plan, I feel good about this, we're going. And then when you realized she had no plan and was just doing whatever, you're like, well, this is, you know. And so leading and following, again, authority. Why are we, in this case, why do we feel like we need to hide our authority? If you got an idea, go with it. And so there's lots of pieces in there. And did you have a plan?
No, the plan was...
So she projected the plan on you.
Yeah, but the plan was to reflect that nothing goes the way that you think it's going to go.
Oh.
And so when she started to put
your plan worked.
Yeah, the next thing was supposed to be, I figured like it was going to be the, and I said, what is another T word that doesn't start with the? Like so I changed it. So I was like, oh, because as a therapist, one of my things is it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go.
So you were in that more rebellious mode of like kind of acting, which is fine. And again, it's not a totally playful mode, right? There's an agenda with it. And so what we're looking at, or we can be, is what gets in the way of a playful mode, of just like doing what feels right artistically or whatever we want to make, because we tend to bring some sort of agenda to this. And so how does that help us feel safer? Is that a role we get trapped in a lot? What would it be like to get out of that role? And those pieces. So there's a lot in this, as well as the like, we have the beautiful, like, she had a plan. She's like, I didn't have a plan. It's like, well, do you assume everybody has a plan? And now you're all going around planless? Like, so those projections can be interesting. So I always check if somebody says, well, I knew she was thinking this, I will generally check and say, is that what you were thinking? Because how could you know? You're drawing lines. Like, there's no way to really know what someone is thinking. Yes, ma'am.
We know each other too well. I knew what color crayon she was going to get before she got it. And when we worked together, we were really close, so it was like one mind almost in doing this thing, which I don't know what we gained from that. But the only real little snag was that it's a flower. I thought she was going to put F. She put the first letter, but when she put a B, I thought, ooh. It's the only time I had a room, so I had to put it in and think on it, figure it out. So I think it might, in therapy, I want to know if they client really well, but I don't know what they're going to do. You know? So I don't know that I got a whole lot out of it.
So there's the interesting piece in there about self-disclosure, right? Because if we are going to play these games with our patients, we are revealing something about ourselves. Like when I teach and when I work with groups, I know that I am different as a clinician, that they are going to learn more about me. Because in order for me to improvise with them, I have to use my spontaneous material. I can't fake it. I can't pretend. I can't ask them to do that if I'm hiding. So that's an interesting piece, is that we have to be okay with that and kind of revealing, what we might do and say and have them know a little bit more about us. And for some of us, that's not how we work. It's not what we do. And that's totally fine. But being aware of that and exploring it and knowing. And then I think you brought up the interesting piece of, does this work if I know the person, or if we're in a sustaining relationship? But I would say there's still something to look at in there, because what's it like to be in a totally predictable relationship? What's it like to know that you can be read all the time? Did either of you kind of want to maybe jump out of the box and do something a little wacky or do something different? When you did put that B down, was that fun? Or was it like, hey, you're not being you, right? So we can still look at a lot of different dynamics, even if we know the person, don't know the person. It's all just grist for the mill, whatever comes up.
The way that she was like talking about it, she like lit up that she was like talking about how they're coworkers and they're connected, that she seemed like excited about that and like proud that she has this connection with her coworker, like even as she was like sharing it.
She's got your back.
I found it interesting though about deciding who was going to go first.
Yes, that's always interesting.
Because she would ask, and my people-pleasing nature said, I don't really care.
You guys did it verbally?
Yeah.
Rule violation.
Oh.
Which is fine, but there was some anxiety about who's gonna go first. So go ahead and finish. But
She said, I think you're the A and I'm the B. And I said, well, is that because you think I'm type A? Like we've never had that conversation before.
And so there's the who goes first people can get stuck on that for a very long time. It's interesting, and I don't know if you guys didn't hear the instructions or if you just didn't care. It may have been too anxiety provoking to do it non-verbally, because maybe you needed to work that out. And there's so what was that about? That anxiety was there. So again, there's nothing wrong. It's not like we have to kick you out. You violated the rules of the game. But it's like, people get very hung up on rules. So one thing I noticed is is a line a line? Can it curve? How many? And I give the instructions as I do I've learned over the years, in a very particular way. Because what will often, it's like, I don't care. I mean, again, stakes could not be lower, doesn't matter. But what will often happen in dyads, when you have that tension and that people pleasing and that like, is this right? Let me bring in a third party to mediate this and help me know if this is okay and relieve some of that anxiety, right? As opposed to just trusting my instinct of like, she said a mark is a mark, a line is a line, I'm gonna do whatever I want, own it. We wanna know we're doing things right. We probably don't wanna make our partner mad. What if I do too much? What if I do too little? And so it's a way of not being in that relationship just as you, right? So that's why the instructions with this are vague. And when you guys were asking questions, I was like, I don't know, whatever. Because it doesn't matter, but we tend to there's a right and wrong and a right and wrong. And that can be worked out in the dyad. And what's it like to put a big mark down and not know if your partner's like, well, that was hoggy. That was kind of decisive of you. What's that like, rather than having me issue a dictate about every line should be 2 inches and it can't curve or whatever. That power is hard to own in relationships. Yes, ma'am.
I heard you all have that discussion, and I said, ooh.
Did you know they were violating the rule? And you let them violate it, which is, she's like, they're not supposed to be doing that, it's okay. And so that if we were in a group process, I might bring all of that up, right? And kind of like whatever. But again, it's just grist for the mill, like what was going on with that. Because with rules, it is interesting. People will genuinely not hear me, or anxiety makes us not aware of rules, or it's like, I didn't like that rule. People will very deliberately decide what rules they hear me say and what rules they don't. And so I will bring that in. Like, why'd you hear that? You heard a rule I didn't even say, but then you didn't hear the one I actually gave. So what is going on with that and those associations and projections? So for part 2 of this, if any team, I'll explain what it is, and then we'll see if anyone's brave enough to do it. But if not, you'll know what it is, because it's easier to do in a small group, admittedly. But for part 2, what I do is I invite a pair who is so inclined to, you basically become the experts on your drawing. And you present the drawing to the group as the experts on it, without conferring, without deliberating, and you will explain to us what this drawing is with great authority between the two of you. And we, being an audience that is here to get your expertise, may have questions for you about this drawing and about what you're presenting. We may have thoughts we want to add, but I invite each pair to become a complete expert on whatever they've made and to explain it to us, completely improvisationally without any planning between them. So the same thing comes up: who goes first, who says what, how does this work? But you can't talk about that explicitly. So does anybody want to try that? Yes! Okay, do you guys mind standing up so people can see you and projecting? This is like very brave, so we're going to give them a round of applause. The only guidance that I give, and I normally don't, but the thing I've learned that makes this more fun is if you don't make it a piece of abstract art. If you make this a piece of abstract art, it's a little less fun. So make it a legit thing in the world, and you are total, you know everything about this.
Okay, so we would like for you all to understand that this is a test of try, because what we were doing on a 3-dimensional scale was we are measuring how to get sound up to the mountaintop. Here we go. So this is the measure. Here we are. So this is our instrument. This is the city. This is the city line. These are the mountains. This is our measure, our instrument. We're measuring from, and we've decided that it takes 7 hours to make this happen, to make the sound vibrate off the mountaintop.
Thank you. And, we discovered that the difference in frequency of sound, whether it's block zigzag or mountainous zigzaggy, does affect the way that the sound reaches the mountaintop.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
There's a tripod at the bottom. Is that significant? Like the 3...
It's the instrument. That's a part of the instrument.
And we needed the balance. We needed to make the balance so that we could actually be accurate with the sound.
Right. And then as you see that it kind of changes. This one has these two have a little more of a strong foundation, and this one is weaker because the frequency of the sound changes eventually. Mm-hmm. That's what affects it.
Any other questions?
Does it matter what type of earth the mountain is made of?
Well, it varies because we have, as you see, some high peaks, and you have a couple of that have like both flat and high points.
Are you expecting a particular sound to come from that instrument?
Well, actually, not really. We were just very curious about the sound. Curious about what the feedback we would get, if it's a high vibration, low vibration. We have a question here.
Did you guys talk about this before you presented it, or she just rolled off what you said?
I tried to.
We did not talk about it. Yes.
Okay, so I was wondering how much sound was absorbed versus how much sound reverberated back.
6 and apparently 7.5.
The vibration was 6 and 7.5.
All right,
So-
one more question, then I'll let these
So
folks
do
off.
the effects of the sound, is it something like fracking, or, what's the result of all of this sound?
Well, the reason we did the study is because we understand that as therapists, okay, we have physical memory, and we know that sound breaks up the memory and gives you opportunity to release it. And so we were wondering if we made these projections, how we could use it with our patients to help them break up the sound and the trauma and release it from their bodies.
So, what did you notice watching that? Thank you guys again. That was amazing. What did you notice just about their process, or what was fun about that? There were laughs there was a really big first laugh when, what's your name? when Shalinda jumped in and said, "Thank you." What was going on? What were you seeing that felt fun?
It was, total BS, but they were serious about it. It was heart attacks.
They were like owning that, right? Like that made no sense. Anything they said made very little sense. But the part of what you guys were enjoying and like the thank you was kind of it acknowledged the like, I don't know what's going on. And but I am with you. And I am in this with you. And yes, this is what's happening. I don't know what you were talking about. This is not where I would have gone. But yes. And now I have to make something up to go with it, right? Which is a beautiful, fun thing. And so the authenticity of that and kind of owning the like, don't quite know, but yeah, I'm in it with you. The other piece is that there is something about, and this is really fun to do with our perfectionistic patients, or once you've got trust, you need a fair amount of trust to do this in a group. But because people's demeanor will change dramatically. I don't know if you guys actually did. You seem like pretty confident in general. But you will get a very different demeanor from people when you put them in an expert role. When you say you know everything about nonsense. You can actually get them to have that level of confidence. And even if it's only for the 2 minutes that they're doing that, that feeling will carry. And you can at least like see what it looks like on them. And see, and when was the last time you felt that way? But there's a lot of, I really like expert games a lot, because when you say to somebody, like, you know more than everybody else does, and everything you say is right, we're like, yeah, the sound and the mountain and the seven, what, I don't know. But part of what created that with them was that they knew that we weren't going to be like, that's not right. We were going to be like, okay, yeah, tell me more about this thing. And so that's a really liberating, fun thing to watch go on. Yes, ma'am.
I was a journalism major, and one of my professors brought up the point when we were talking about who to interview for a certain article, and she said, and I apply it to my clients now, she said, all of us are expert on something.
Yes.
You don't interview someone who's not an expert to write about a certain subject. You find an expert. And that's the same thing. Part of my, I guess, looking at a client is, what about this client is good?
Yeah.
No matter what they say about each other, what kind of stuff they've been through, the fact they're in the office is good. And so that thing about the expert, it really does work.
Yeah, and it's very empowering. Does anybody else want to try this now that you've seen it? It's fun, you guys. No? Do it, yes! Yay!
I want you to know that we are presenting to you for the first time our entry into the Louvre. We have worked together for a very long time on this picture, trying to improve it and perfect it well enough that it could get entrance to the Louvre.
So what it depicts is our working relationship. So I'm yellow, and she is the fuchsia color. And we've created this to show, because we're both therapists, how it really can take two people, and we partner quite a bit. And so as we work with people, and we started up here, and then we grew our stem, and then we grew our flowers, and we built a foundation for our clients. And then what does it mean? It says bloom. And so every client of ours has an opportunity to bloom. And sometimes it's finding out that they need to bloom where they're planted, even if that's difficult.
Right. And we have learned a lot about each other from this drawing. The reason we think it's going to be quality to get into the Louvre is because of what we put into it and what it means to us. For instance, she's yellow and gentle and light. I'm boisterous and loud and colorful. And together we bloom into a beautiful picture. So that is what we started with, that that idea and came up with this drawing. And we hope that one day you will be able to read about us in an article in some magazine. I don't care what it is, really, but some magazine.
Is there questions? I see one here.
Do you have to present that to a panel at the Louvre to be voted upon? Do you know what the criteria are?
I have no idea. This is just the starting of a picture, which we have in mind that we will present it somewhere, and why not start at the top? And any other questions?
I was wondering if the red had any, if there was a significance of the red color choice.
Fuchsia.
Symbolic. Is it fuchsia?
Yes, she said fuchsia.
Okay.
Well, I'll answer that since it's my color. Actually, it's just my favorite color. And so she picked her favorite, I picked my favorite, and we blended together our favorite thing. You know, kind of like the song about favorite thing. Okay. Yes.
If you were going to sell this, how much would you sell it to us for?
That's a good question.
Oh, I'll let you handle that.
That's a very interesting question because as therapists we view it differently, and so I would price it very high because of all the training that I've personally gone through and what I know my abilities are and what I invest in my clients.
Say how much. You know how much.
How
You
much?
know everything.
I know everything. Yeah, and having a child that's an artist, I put it at $1 million.
Very nice. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. So the other part that I might debrief or use these in the debrief is about the relationship, which you guys were starting to tune into. But what relationship dynamics can we see? Does one person have the power in this relationship? How do you know? Does the other person not? I also, generally with more time, will talk to the two people who presented about how did that feel for you. And that's where you can get a lot of the good like I loved, when you said this and it was so interesting and then I knew I could say that. Or if, this doesn't always elicit everyone's greatest side. So this game will elicit and show off the person who's kind of like, that's not what that is. Or like, that's not, They'll kind of get contentious, which can actually work and be very fun. But it's another piece to process of just, is that something that comes out a lot? What is that like? It doesn't always, these were two very supportive examples because we're therapists and so that's how this is going to go. But obviously the more personalities you get, you can really start to see the subtleties. And then it's like, when you said no, or what was that about? Because often it'll come across as it's a power play or he's not listening to me, when often it's anxiety. And it's I didn't know what she meant, or I didn't know how to say something funny. And I let you get away with an I don't know about the panel. I didn't let you with the money. And I'm not sure why. I don't know. I would have to think about how to explain that. But the I don't know sometimes can feel very fun and still like it's a yes.
I thought what I said is I'll let you handle that.
No, for the money you did. For the panel, you said, I don't know. Because somebody said, are we going to present this to a panel? And you said, I don't know. And sometimes I would say, like, yes, you do. Like, go with that. But in that case, it still felt like a yes because of how you were like, I don't know, but our goal is to get it in an article, and we want to do this, and we want to do that. And I do want to model that sometimes it's okay to not know. We don't have to be perfect. But when it feels like somebody's anxiously avoiding the question, or like the money, it was like, I don't want to talk about money. Nobody ever wants to talk about money. It's like, yes, you do. So there's kind of an instinctive, usually I won't let people out of those. But this can elicit a lot for folks. And it's just really fun because there's, again, no stakes. And you get to really, and the audience gets to play along and really look at those dynamics of being supportive and creative together. And we have 2 minutes left. Are there any questions? Anything else you noticed?
Get our papers back.
Those?
Our stories. Yeah, our 7-line stories.
So there are,
over there.
yes, there are orphan 7-line stories over here. I think there is an email list going around, and I will take that and send folks who want the info. Did anybody not get to answer this or put their if anybody wants to add your email to this. But it has been a pleasure. Thank you guys for playing along.